Well, thank you, Richard, for the introduction, for the invitation. I'm glad to be back in San Diego, the East of the Americas, and see so many friends from the past. This is like a throwback of 30 years. I mean, when we negotiated the NAFTA in 1993, I'm a technocrat. I'm a bureau technocrat. Herminio Blanco and Mancera told me, well, Luis, no, you're going to do media to help promote the passage of the NAFTA back then and through the US Congress. And, so I went to every city in the US. You tell me a city, I'll tell you the paper. And visited all the editorial boards to promote an idea. The NAFTA is an idea. I mean, it's a 2,000-page text, but it's basically an idea. And ideas have a significant influence on reality, deeper than most people realize. One of the few people, the first people I knew about the, I learned about the Institute of Americas through Colleen Morton. Colleen was here, I think, at the beginning of the Institute. And she was in charge of a private sector effort to lobby for NAFTA in Washington before she came. And they did a study, KPMG did that for them, for the private sector in the US, forecasting where the NAFTA will be in 20 years, so in terms of imports and exports and investment flows. And if you look back at those numbers, I mean, they're minuscule compared to the numbers we have today. I mean, I remember we took bets as to when Mexico would be able to export $10 billion a month. In the month of March, we exported $55 billion in just 1 month. $55 billion is the total exports of large countries like Colombia for the whole year. And Mexico is now exporting $55 billion just in 1 month. And that is because it's an idea, and this idea made sense. Now, this idea happened because there was already a significant integration between Mexico and the US. And the NAFTA just codified that to make it deeper, to make it go further. And that idea will, in the end, succeed because it's succeeding already, and the integration will just proceed because it's structural. I mean, and this will happen in spite of governments. I mean, governments are more an obstacle in most cases than a solution to this integration. In 100, 150 years from now, there will be a professor at the Sorbonne in France that will write his PhD dissertation saying the founding fathers of the NAFTA were Donald Trump and Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Because he will see the two names stamped on the Federal Register and in the Diario Oficial of Mexico signing the implementation of Usmca. And well, I mean, this is the founding fathers of the North American integration are the two people that have opposed the agreement the most. And the reason that they turn around themselves in spite of the original inclination to oppose it is because the forces for the integration are just deep. Well, when we negotiated NAFTA, and I had to do the rounds of editorial boards and meetings at the Institute of Americas and other places promoting the idea, one of the things I used was a map showing what Mexico had to do in terms of infrastructure to really take advantage of the agreement. Because if the argument was, well, if Mexico's main comparative advantage is its location, I don't think that is Mexico's main comparative advantage, by the way. But location is an important advantage, of course. If that's the case, well, then you need an infrastructure to make that integration profitable, grow exponentially, and feasible. So, and one of the things I had in that map was the binational airport in Tijuana, knowing that Lindbergh has a short runway, that the runway in Tijuana is long, and back then Tijuana could have, there was space to do one more runway, not anymore without significant expropriation, but that's one of the things that I used in that map. The other one that I used was that the future of the the southern states of Mexico and the northern states of Central America, the future of that region was making it closer to the east coast of the US. And 3 weeks ago, you might have seen an event in Veracruz with President López Obrador. And President López Obrador says to his staff, please show the map. And he shows up a map with maritime lines between Coatzacoalcos and Mobile, Alabama, and Progreso and St. Petersburg, Tampa in Florida, and how that could benefit Oaxaca, Guerrero, Chiapas, Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras. And that is my map. The same map that I used to convince Melin on the San Diego Tijuana binational airport. Now the president of Mexico is using. And the fact that he's doing that is significant reversal on his ideological inclination. Because and he said in his speech that the future of those states lies on the east coast of the US. Because Mexico has now 14% market share in North America, in Washington, in the US. We're the number 2 supplier to the US. Number 1 is China with 17. Mexico has 14, 1-4. But when you take a regional distribution of that 14%, from Texas to California, we have almost 23% market share. In the Midwest, we have 17%. But in the East Coast, from Florida to Virginia, we have 9%. And from Maryland to Maine, we have 5%. So there is an underrepresentation of Mexico on the East Coast. And the reason for that is logistics. We don't have the logistics to tap into CSX and Norfolk Southern. And most of the traffic is handled by truck or by UP and Burlington Santa Fe on the west of the Mississippi. And that's where Mexico is relatively strong, industrially and in terms of integration. So if you want to develop Oaxaca is much closer to the East Coast than to LA in terms of miles and kilometers. So crossing the Gulf of Mexico, make the Gulf of Mexico a mare nostrum where you could serve as catalyst for the development of Mexico South and the northern part of Central America. Well, those ideas, we developed more than 30 years ago in that map, and others. Well, those are in the 2 extremes of Mexico, the more salient. Now, the idea of the binational airport it was not mine, but I was undersecretary when I met Melin, and I pushed the idea. But actually, the idea came from the U.S. The U.S. made a proposal to Mexico in when the twin airport. When we were with President Carlos Salinas, and there was a cabinet meeting. And the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, Fernando Solana, said, Mr. President, that's an idea we cannot accept. And they say, why? Why when we have a binational airport like in Geneva, you have Switzerland and France? And he said, well, because in case of war, the US will take over the airport and we'll lose sovereignty. And I said, listen, if in case of war, they have to take the Tijuana San Diego airport, the US has already lost the war. She's relevant. And of course, the idea was killed. But some people are tercos, as you would say in Spanish, stubborn. I'm one of those, and I kept on saying, this is a good idea, we should do it. And finally, it's happened, not only because it makes sense, the idea, but because there's structural reasons as to why it should happen. Now, the NAFTA was a manufacturing success at first, and then an agriculture success. A good chunk of the incremental industrial base from the Midwest moved to Mexico in the last 30 years. It's not half, as Donald Trump used to say, because we don't have the cap. Lorenzo would be a very wealthy person if half of the industrial base of the Midwest came to Mexico, because Vesta would be, I mean, humongously large, no? But even 5% of the incremental capacity of the Midwest moving to Mexico is significant numbers, and that's what happened. But I mean, that was the first 15 years of the NAFTA. Then, like 15 years ago, what happened in manufacturing began to happen in agriculture. I mean, thanks to the lack of workers in the US, the more expensive water and the scarcity of water in California, and thanks to the Federal Reserve pushing land prices up with excess liquidity, that induced the movement of agricultural production from California to Mexico. And if we have 14% market share overall, in agriculture, we closed 2021 with 25% of the US market. It's a humongous number. Number two country supplying the US is Canada. Mexico is number one. And Canada has a 12% market share. So Mexico, and this, I mean, and if you look at the graphs, are just, I mean, skyrocketing like this. I mean, in the first 3 months of 2022, we exported to the US more dollars in berries than beer. And beer is, I mean, it's a very significant. Mexico has a 65% market share on beer in the US. So of all the beers that are imported from the world, 65% come from Mexico. I mean, of course, we just drank 2 Pacificos upstairs. So, but why is berries interesting? Well, berries is interesting because when we negotiated in NAFTA, most people in academia would say, listen, in agriculture, Mexico will lose to Canada and the US. It's impossible. I mean, Canada and the US are powerhouses. I mean, they have all the technology, the best land, and the all the equipment. And berries is a produce that comes from more template weather. I mean, Mexico is too warm for berries. Well, Mexico, of course, has different altitudes, and in different altitudes we have all the weathers, and with different climates, Mexico is now the largest supplier of berries to the US. And Driscoll, which is a California company, has 55,000 workers in the Mexico countryside, and all of them with the social security checks, with Infonavit. They're formal workers, and it's a revolution. And what's going to happen in agriculture is that Mexico is not only going to continue growing in terms of its market participation in the US, but we are moving towards higher value added type of things we do. So it's not only the tomatoes and the lettuce, but the salads, and then the will become the kitchen of the US. And when you go to a restaurant here in the US, you already feel that there is more season to what you eat. We had a discussion with Carla Hills, the US chief negotiator in the NAFTA, saying, what's going to happen first? That taco joints in Mexico will serve hamburgers, or that McDonald's will sell burritos? we won't have hands up. Well, I mean, that's the past, no? And it will continue. Manufacturing will just continue, will accelerate now with the issues with China, and agriculture will just continue. But I mean, the future of the USMCA is digital. Digital in the sense that competition with China is a competition for technological leadership. I mean, that's where competition is. And the question is whether Mexico can or is willing to participate in that front. I mean, in changing the way we approach things, and using more brains and less brawn in our competitiveness. You would say that López Obrador is probably the best person, best possible president to implement the changes Mexico needs to do to become truly competitive. Why? Well, because he encounters no opposition. I mean, I sat in many cabinet meetings with Fox, and then look at decision-making process by Calderon and Peña Nieto outside of government. And they always, when somebody made a proposal, the president would say, well, that's very interesting, but how is López Obrador going to react to it? And then they will say, well, I mean, there will be demonstrations, and then the president will say, well, instead of doing it that way, why don't we take 2 or 3 things down and make it that, water down the proposal so that we soften López Obrador. And of course, you would never soften López Obrador. On the contrary, he sensed that you were weak, and he would make it even more stronger opposition to the idea. So for 20 some years, Mexico tried to do timid reforms. But López Obrador was different, because López Obrador did not encounter the López Obrador factor. Unfortunately, he has other views and has delayed Mexico's quest for true competitiveness. López Obrador has an economic frame mind with 3 segments in it. Segment number 1 is hydrocarbons. I mean, he comes from Tabasco. He has this idea of el nacionalismo revolucionario, no? That is very ingrained, that this Mexico's sovereignty is on the ground. And actually, Article 27 on the Mexican Constitution comes from the Bourbon kings in Spain. That's why it's called sovereignty. The protection of soberana is the protection of the king's property. And in Mexico, that article begins saying that the property belongs originally to the nation, with capital N, and the nation can make a concession for the formation of private property. López Obrador is very ingrained into that way of thinking, and that's why he's now pushing for lithium as the next big idea. And that clouds his view on everything else. So that is the segment number 1 of his thinking, economic thinking. Segment number 2 of his thinking is what I call reasonable profits. This is very Jesuit. Is the poor reading of the gospel. In poor reading of the gospel, in the sense that is the reading that leads you to believe that you have to be in favor of poverty, and not only against poverty, but in favor of the poor. And if you have profits, in López Obrador's mind, I'm not saying this because that's the way I interpret it, because if you read La Economía Moral, that's what he says. He says that profits are the outcome of either 2 possibilities, luck or corruption, but not effort, not investment, nor well, the problem is that North America integration is contrary to that principle, because success in North America requires that you see profits as a legitimate aspiration, and that you base that aspiration on your creativity, your investment, your efforts, your hard work, and your brains, your creativity. And the worst combination for López Obrador is if you make profits in the energy sector, because that's the marriage of the 2 triangles, the hydrocarbons and the reasonable profits. The 3rd triangle, though, that he has in his mind is what I call balanced budgets. He has an obsession with balanced budgets. The question is why? I mean, why is he, if he's a populist, why is he obsessed with balanced budgets, which is a very conservative thing? No? López Obrador is a conservative populist. He's conservative in terms of social policies, but also conservative in terms of public finances. And the reason for that is, some people think that is because his parents were shopkeepers. But I mean, the problem is that he was not born in Granton, England. but in Villahermosa, Tabasco. Because if he was born in Granton, England, he would be Lopez Obrador Thatcher, no? I mean, maybe the shopkeeping part role of his parents played a role, but I think the real reason why he's conservative on fiscal side is because he knows, and he's right, that technocrats took over from politicians in the PRI in the 1980s because of the financial crisis Mexico went through. And if he engineers a financial crisis going forward, the technocrats will be back because it's only technocrats that can balance the books. So, and he fears that more than anything else. When he says, I'm expecting a counter reform against the fourth transformation, he's saying the technocrats are taking over back again. And I will prevent that from happening by having a relatively decent public finance positioning and an independent central bank. Now, the problem for him is that this third triangle of his economic mind is a contradiction with the other two, because it limits his ambition in terms of energy and it limits his ambition in terms of unreasonable profits. Lopez Obrador is the president of Mexico whose success depends more on the success of the private sector ever. I mean, corporate income tax is the largest contributor to public finances in Mexico today. So he needs the private sector to succeed because they will be funding his balanced budget. And that's why he's so difficult to interpret, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Now, how do you make Mexico successful in the context of increased integration in North America? And I think what's happening around the world in terms of China and the Ukraine and others make the integration even more likely. I mean, there's three reasons why the North American integration will proceed. One is demographics. I mean, North America has the best demographics compared to our competitors, to Asia or to Europe. Much better. I mean, and much better than the rest of Latin America. I mean, Brazilians are a little older than we are. And the other guys in Latin America are relatively small, with the exception of Colombia, maybe. The others, and Colombia has a problem, which has no logistics. No? I mean, getting it out of Colombia, with the exception of cocaine, is quite difficult. Because cocaine uses, high-speed boats that you cannot use for less valuable commodities, but would be simpler. So the demographics is, of course, destiny. And for the next 40 years, the best demographics in the world outside Africa is in North America. India has good demographics, but India has very unbalanced. They have a lot of children in the north and a lot of old people in the south. The question is whether they can take advantage of that. But I mean, there is a lot of linguistic, ethnic, and religious differences within. So we'll see. If the democracy of India is successful, they may be able to handle it. So reason number two is that the differences with China are structural, and they will just continue. I mean, in the US, there's consensus that China is the US's competitor. And that's Democrats and Republicans, and even the private sector believe that's the case. So if you believe that strongly, then you cannot put all the eggs in just one basket of China. And you have to diversify your investment portfolio away. And that diversification of the investment portfolio means that you will invest more in Vietnam. Vietnam is now the #1 winner of the diversification of Chinese risk, and other places, but other places include Mexico, because Mexico is the best candidate to diversify Chinese risk, because location matters, and because the business cycle, and our business cycle is contrary to the China's business cycle. Because when China does well, commodities go up. And Mexico is an exporter of manufacturing goods. We're an importer of commodities. One thing that is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years is that the terms of trade between commodities and manufacturing will move in favor of manufacturing against commodities. We don't see that now because of the Fed policy that has injected so much liquidity that commodity prices are high. But when China begins to change its economic policy towards the internal market and away from real estate, the price of steel and cement and raw materials in general will begin to come down in relative terms, and manufacturing will go up. Well, that is tremendously positive news for Mexico. So reason number one is demographics. Reason number two is China. The changes in China that are related to some demographics. I mean, China has the following challenge. Japan became old, rich. China is about to become old, poor. Relatively poor, on average. No? You have very wealthy people in China, and then you have very poor people. So how do you face that Chinese challenge? Well, the only way to face that challenge is through a significant technological jump. And you have to leapfrog technology in such a way in China so you can raise living standards and with much less effort and to increase productivity 8 times, no? Something like that. Well, that's why the race is technological, because the Chinese have no option but to step on the gas pedal for more technology, they develop the new technologies of the future. I mean, define the standards and find the new ways of producing. Now, the problem with that is that the success on the technological front is decentralized. I mean, the reason why China has been successful in the last 30 years, and Japan was before, and Korea, is because they have decentralized technological development with little government intervention. I mean, that's not what you generally read, but that's what happened. Now, Xi Jinping is a control freak because the politics in China are very complex. So they are now trying to re-centralize decision-making in China. And if you try to centralize decision-making in China on technology, then he will kill innovation. And by killing innovation, they will not be able to. So the question for China is whether you can be successful in terms of raising living standards and decentralized in terms of development technology. So that's reason number two. And reason number three is that the more expensive, the more difficult things become in Europe, the more likely things will happen in North America. I mean, natural gas prices in Germany are now $26 per million BTUs. In North America, they close today at 8.5. I mean, they went up to very significant. They went up 8% today, this morning. Well, $8 is a lot cheaper than $26. So, I mean, if you are going to open a new steel furnace, would you do it in North America or in Germany? Well, in Germany, you cannot do it in Germany. No matter how efficient they are, those prices, things will happen. Now, what should Mexico do to take advantage of this unique potential that exists? Well, we have to work on 5 issues. Issue number one is logistics. I will not go into more maps. I already mentioned that, but I mean the idea of logistics, border crossing, ports, airports, etc. Well, we're not sending the signal that we want large airports, large international airports, are we? Number two is energy. You need a competitive energy market. In Mexico, when they invite you to speak on energy conferences, they say the energy sector. We'll know that we're making progress on energy when we stop using the word sector and substitute that with market. Because in a market, you have options. In a sector, you have central command. I'm in charge of this sector of the economy. Energy is crucially important because we're very competitive today, very competitive in manufacturing, as Lorenzo and the state clients know in Mexico, with expensive energy, with cheap energy and abundant energy. We are unstoppable in terms of the industrial development of Mexico. And not only that, I mean, the rules of origin in the USMCA and the NAFTA, in all of the sectors that the rules of origin were strict, the sector is now smaller than pre-NAFTA. It was a huge mistake. I mean, by trying to overprotect the sector, you condemn that sector not to grow and actually shrink. So instead of promoting strict rules of origin, what you should promote is the integration of the energy market, because if you integrate the energy market, then the steel, the glass, the fiberglass, the synthetic fibers, the resins will be from North America. What is the advantage that the operations in Asia have? Well, they have a lot of talent and a lot of labor force that is very competent. But the main advantage they have is that it's the vertical integration. I mean, if you produce something in China, and it's like a shirt or a coat, you can find in China 1,000 fabrics with different colors and different textures, different fabrics, mixture of fabrics. The same thing for zippers and the linings inside. In North America, I mean, it's the supply is very limited. So if you want to compete in fashion, I mean, relying on suppliers from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Mexico is you will produce a fashion show worth of Albigenos, Cambridge. Those don't exist anymore. No? Target, we could compete in Target. So if you want to increase value added per unit of export, you need energy integration. And energy integration implies that we have an North American energy market with more power lines across the border, with more pipelines going underneath, and with a lot of renewables, because you need a matrix of a nuclear as well, a matrix of energy production, so that you can be competitive and you can also comply with the investors' wishes to have a clean energy to compete successfully. Number three, you need rule of law. I mean, that's asking Mexicans to wear a suit that doesn't fit us quite well, but it's very important. I mean, because now we're going to be competing in sense of brains, and brains require an environment that is conducive for creativity, and of course, rule of law becomes very important on that. Why are industrial parks successful in Mexico? Well, because within the industrial park, you feel you are in Switzerland. I mean, everything works inside the park. The streets are perfect. The sewage, it works perfectly, absolutely clean. You could eat on the floor of the assembly line. You go out, and there is no sidewalks, and the roads are a lot of potholes, and there is poor public transportation. No, it's quite inconsistent. You can go from Switzerland to Tijuana in 10 seconds. Open the door and you move. Because in those industrial parks, the conditions are different, and that's why they are competitive. So rule of law is very important. The third thing that you need is technological development. And technological development implies human capital. I mean, that's engineers mostly. And we already graduate a good number of engineers, but we need to do much more. And not only that, we need to improve their abilities so that they not only do engineering and then they go to MBAs at Berkeley. My daughter just did that. No, she's a chemical engineer, and instead of doing more chemistry, and she moved to an MBA. She has high hopes, no? But I mean, the country needs that sort of talent to develop their technical skills. We need more human capital in the health sector, because the health sector is the largest sector in North America, in the US, and the health sector is high value-added jobs, and that is from molecular biology, I mean, the development of the new medications, to clinical analysis for the development of those medications, to treatment of people of all kinds, because it's labor intensive. I mean, robots can do so much, but I mean, the nurses are needed. Mexico could supply 1 million nurses to North America in the next 10 years. Well, that requires significant investment in terms of human capital, and we should have that vision. Of course, I mean, we have now a president that is against science and against technology. And finally, you need democracy. You need democracy because without democracy, Mexico will not be competitive. Because development, in the end, is a voluntary process. It's a process because it's very costly. So people need to decide, we want to become a developed country, and we're willing to invest this much to make that happen. And that they have to choose that. And that's why what's happening in 2022 in Chile and in Mexico is so important. Because Chileans are now deciding, they will be deciding in a few weeks, whether they want to become a developed country or whether they want to go back 30 years and begin again, start thinking whether they want to become a developed country. They have development within their grasp. But development is not a process that is linear and completely rational, no? But it's the result of the voluntary of the most people, and that has to be expressed through democracy. The big debate between the capitalism, state capitalism in China and Western capitalism based on liberal democracies is precisely that, whether decisions are centralized or not, and decentralization of the decision-making process is synonymous with democracy. Now, Mexico is going through the same process. I mean, and López Obrador is part of that introspection Mexicans have to take so that we can choose. It's not easy because, I mean, the populists have the easier argument in terms of communications, because, I mean, they can appeal to the passions people feel, and we have to make the rational argument. And the rational argument is more difficult to convey. But in the end, if the argument is right, then the idea will, in the end, happen. Because the idea is powerful and there's structural reasons as to why it should happen. So the future of North America, I think, lies on whether we understand that the success of USMCA will be digital, in the sense that it's brain-based. And digital, in terms of energy, means electrical. Everything will be electrical, now from the robots to the cars to the surgeons, and everything will be electrical. And in electricity, well, we have a person in Mexico that runs the electrical system. If he's 85, he will not suffer the consequences of his decisions. And that's why he's against the modernizing that sector. But I mean, that's one important part. But the more important part is that it will lead you to exploit your main comparative advantage, which is the talent of Mexicans. And talent will only develop in a system where we can question the status quo and think about things. And that means, of course, that you have to be a democratic country. So, but I mean, democracy is messy, and finding the right solution is a complicated process. And so we have to be a little patient so that we can be a little more optimist. As Rafael was asking me to say something more optimist, I will coach in that sense. Now, success is not for certain. I mean, there's a good chance that we will fail and we'll make significant mistakes. But I mean, if Mexico does not develop in the next 30 years or so, it is because we'll make very significant mistakes. Because the outside conditions for that development exist in terms of demographics, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the difficulties China has, they're structural, and in terms of the potential that exists in this region, that is tremendously important. Now, Mexico's-US relationship in that sense is very significant in that outcome. No? And well, I mean, we're going through different difficult times right now. let me just end by saying that um, uh, that it's important to trust people that they'll, in the end, they'll take the right decisions. But I mean, we need to speak up in favor of what's right. And that includes, I mean, I was reading a report prepared for the Trilateral Commission that is going to be presented in Washington the next 2 weeks on the future of capitalism. Well, the Trilateral Commission has as a mandate to defend Western values. And if you read the report, I mean, it's a poor defense of capitalism. Because, I mean, they don't say out loud, listen, I mean, the market economy is the way to go. I mean, they couch it with so many terms that, with so many objectives that you don't get the sense that, I mean, they're defending capitalism. They're defending political correctness. And countries have a process, and the US is going through its own process, not only Mexico, in finding its own way going forward. I mean, in the end, I think that reason will prevail, even though the populist message is easier to send.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank you.
So building upon this last point you made, this week at the World Economic Forum, there's been a lot of talk about deglobalization and the post-neoliberal world, which is what you're basically talking about, and this challenge that we're facing, not just in Mexico, but even in the United States and other countries like Chile. What can we do as business, as civil society to move the needle? Because it's not going to be easy. Mexico has got over 50% of its population living in poverty. So obviously, López Obrador has the numbers in his favor in terms of electoral politics. But as you point out, if Mexico is going to prevail, we need reason to prevail, and that's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that López Obrador is anti-capitalist. I mean, if we finish this sexennium for López Obrador with an independent central bank, with relatively sound public finances, and a relatively decent working USMCA, it's a tremendous success. I mean, I think López Obrador's main problem is the opportunity cost. I mean, he has not realized the potential that exists out there to make Mexico truly attractive. I mean, we're getting a lot of investment coming from that otherwise would go to China, but it's much less than we could get. How much? I would say a third. I mean, it could be 3 times larger if we had the right policies and made Mexico really attractive. And that will lead you to a very significant transformation of areas of Mexico that are lagging behind. I think there's two issues that are go together, but they're not the same. I mean, there is an economic deficit in terms of inclusion and in terms of income distribution and people lacking opportunity. True. But that's not the reason that explains Donald Trump or López Obrador. It's a reason, but it's not the main reason. The main reason that explains this populist is the democratic deficit. People don't feel that political parties and their representative leaders represent them. So when you have a strong person like Donald Trump and he goes into the Republican convention and he says, I will be your voice. Well, people follow that because finally they say, listen, that is a guy that understands my feelings. López Obrador says he presents himself as the Tlatuani. Tlatuani is an emperor in Aztec. Tlatuani means in Aztec that the person that owns the word. Because it's exactly, I will speak on your behalf. So that's why the sense that populists are tapping into is this idea that the general public believes that the elites, the multinationals, the large NGOs, the people that can influence Washington and Mexico City, make democracy unworkable for them. And I think that what we have to do is to make for more democracy and not less. I mean, you have to make democracy one of your comparative advantages. So I read a piece this week on whether China was copying the Western countries or whether the Western countries are copying China. And I think the latter is probably more likely now than the former. That we are not sure that the democratic system is superior, as we were not sure before. 40 years ago, if you read a book of economics in Econ 101 taught here or in any university in the US, it will begin saying, well, we don't know whether the capitalist system is superior to central planning. That's the way the books began. Well, that weakness, I think, is very important. So I think we have to work on the two inclusions. I mean, the inclusion on the economic side, but it's not enough. To win the argument, you have to work in terms of the people thinking they can participate in deciding what they want for their own future. But I mean, that's precisely why the discussion in Mexico is between, there is no translation for this, aspiracionistas. Aspiracionista doesn't exist in Spanish, but that's a word from Observador. He blames all the problems of Mexico on aspiracionistas, people that aspire to be better off, against tradicionalistas. In Mexico, there is a country that is so diverse. You would think that the right political system would produce presidents that are aspiracionistas, and then presidents or congresses that are tradicionalistas, and they will alternate. And in the end, you will end up producing more aspiracionistas than tradicionalistas as they begin to get traction. So the key, I think, is to make a system that is more democratic in the sense that every voice can be heard and respected. It is not only the equality of outcome that matters, that's the left, no? It is not the equality of opportunity, that's the right response to the left challenge in terms of equality of outcomes. It is equality of respect, which means dignity. What people want is not only more income, which they of course appreciate, but more dignity. And I think that if we redignify the way we listen to people, then we'll win the rational argument. But if we don't take seriously what they think, then we'll lose the argument. And the populist will always win.
Well, I think was a great way to close your talk. I don't know if there's any questions we can take before we.
Maybe I spoke too long. I'm sorry.
Richard?
Thank you very much for the interesting remarks. I'm trying to get a fix on what the view is on really the role of government in industrial policy, creating competitiveness. And you focused on energy, labor markets, logistics, quality of government. These are all very big items. This is a big debate in the United States now. Also, CSIS study, which argued that the United States and Brazil and Mexico are spending less on industrial policy than China need to catch up. So the question is, for all those major reforms you say are necessary in Mexico to increase competitiveness, what actually is the role of government that you see in Mexico?
No, that's a very important question. I mean, you need these 5 things. No? Logistics is, you know, a significant government intervention. I mean, you can use private sector monies to do the airports, no? But I mean, you need the governments to make that happen, no? The same thing on rail or ports. So I mean, the role of government is crucially important in logistics. You need energy is the same thing, because energy is a network of it's a network. So you need the pipelines. No? Well, how do you pipelines without government? It's very hard. You need the permitting. You need the rights of way. And you need the planning. So same thing on technology. I mean, technology is very close to education. So you need to form the engineers. You need to subsidize certain very basic research. Yes, I mean, that is that choosing sectors? Yes. Which sectors are we choosing? Logistics, energy, education, no? Healthcare. No? Then you need rule of law. Well, I mean, Mexico. The most. I wrote an article last year that was published by La Revista Economía de la UNAM. That it was the title in Spanish is "Por el bienestar de todos, primero el predial," which is, I mean, I'm paraphrasing López Obrador, no? Because if you don't have viable municipalities, you cannot have rule of law and sidewalks and decent roads. It's impossible. And also democracy. Because if the mayor thinks that all the money comes from Mexico City, he will not respond to his constituents. But if the mayor knows that his money comes from his constituents, then he will respond. And then the final thing that I said is democracy. And democracy needs credible institutions. I mean, let's give you an example. Mexico has a very significant comparative advantage on tourism. Well, we're category 2 on air travel. Madness. We have significant advantages on agricultural exports. López Obrador is cutting funding from Mexico's AFIS, Senacica, the sanitary. We have significant advantage in terms of the exports of medical devices. I mean, if you get a stent, the probability that is done in Mexico is 90, Tijuana or Juarez is 99%. Well, I mean, we're cutting funding of COFEPRIS. I mean, we have significant advantages in Mar de Cortés. Well, we're cutting funding for CONAPESCA. So I mean, and this is a government that is supposed to be left, that is cutting the funding for regulators that are the instruments for right government interventions. So I would use the government bodies to ensure that we can take advantage of our comparative advantages so that we flourish. So it's not choosing between, I mean, pure capitalism with no laissez-faire and the right government. You need both things. And I think the debate is more between traditionalists, those Mexicans that strongly believe that progress is not possible because of the objective conditions of people, and that is something that is perfectly understandable. And aspiracionistas that believe that the future is possible. Now, I know Mexico. López Obrador says that he knows Mexico very well. I mean, I have not traveled as much as he has. But if you go and ask Mexican families, whether they are traditionalistas or aspiracionistas, they will have a lot of traditions, but they will aspire to a better future, for sure. And they will not trust the government will give them. They will trust the government will give them some handouts, but the government will not be the. So how do you beat López Obrador or López Obrador movement? How do you beat populism? Well, with two conditions: high turnout. With low turnout, populists can win anywhere. I mean, in France, I mean, 73% of French voted in the second round, and of course, Macron won. With 50%, Madame la Présidente Le Pen serait là. No. Same thing in Mexico. So if you want to be the populist, you need one is turnout, and two, you need to appeal to the idea that things can improve. So you need a certain degree of optimism. Because in fact, the debate between traditionalists and optimists is a debate between pessimists and optimists.
One more question I think we're going to have to.
I have a question I would like you forecast on 3 events that I think is going to be important in the future of the free trade and of Mexico. The first event is going to be the next candidate of Mexico for the official party. Okay. The second one that is related is the outcome of the elections in United States in Congress this year. And the third one is what is going to happen with the meeting of the Americas, in which the government of Biden is investing a lot and there is a lot of risk.
Yeah, well, those are difficult questions. The main challenge we have in front of us is inflation. And there will be, I mean, we're going to see a significant market correction and depressed asset prices. I mean, that market is already down 25%. Fast and you see that still fall more in the next few months, and that will have a political impact. I think it's bad news for Democrats on average, depending on how President Biden can handle that challenge. It's this very significant challenge also for Mexico, depending on how it goes. I mean, the reason why the peso has not devalued is because the central bank has adjusted its policy well before the Fed. We have increased interest rates already 8 times before the Fed increased it once. Last time we did it the other way around. First, and Banxico second, and we saw what happened. So depending on how the inflationary process is handled, the politics will change very significantly. And Lobster fears that. And the antidote to that in Mexico is make Mexico very attractive for real investment. Because if you make Mexico very attractive for real investment, then there will be forces on the peso to appreciate. And there will be more government revenues so that you can take the hit when it happens. I mean, if interest rates go up in the US by 600 basis points, in order to compensate that in terms of public finances on the Mexican side, we will need to grow 3 percentage points more of GDP between now and 2024. How do you do that? Well, take advantage of the thing with China. And that will have a significant impact on the election. If we arrive to 2024 with a crisis, the candidate for Morena will be Marcelo Ebrard. Because it's the only one that can pull off a situation where Mexico is in crisis, and the crisis will depend on whether the Fed will have to jerk up the interest rate too much to stop inflation in the US. And that is really related to the Biden's fortunes in the income. So if I had to forecast, I would say that Republicans will regain the House and potentially the Senate. Abortion might have an impact on that if it changes significantly turnout. But if turnout is low, Republicans will win the House and probably the Senate. The Summit of the Americas, we'll see what happens. López Obrador has said from the beginning that he hates summits. But now he has found the summit he loves. He loves the Summit of the Americas. Because for the first time, he feels that people would like him to go. And he's looking forward to march in the streets of LA and be received by the Latino community in a way similar to Fidel Castro walking through the streets of Santiago with Salvador Allende. I mean, in the imaginary world of López Obrador, I mean, being received as a hero in LA is a very significant accomplishment. Now, for that to happen, because he has cornered himself with his rhetoric, I mean, he needs some sort of solution from the helping hand from the US. So either Biden will have to invite these people, difficult for the president, or he needs Cuba and Venezuela to say, we are not going. I mean, what Cuba and Venezuela need is dollars. I mean, that's why everything that is happening is related to the economic difficulties in Venezuela and Cuba. They need dollars, be them from oil or from tourism. And if López Obrador can be a bridge to help bring some more exports of services or petroleum to Venezuela and Cuba, they will appreciate very much. And they don't care about the summit, because in the summit they will discuss things they don't like: democracy, human rights, environment, things of that sort. The democratic agenda type of thing that is anathema to them. So if they find a way to, now one of the option would be that President Biden says, well, I mean, we're not inviting Cuba and Venezuela, but I will send the high-level delegation to Cuba and Venezuela so that we have discussions as to how to improve things in those two countries. And López Obrador might say, well, I won already, and then he goes to LA. The question is whether he will not fall into the temptation of walking the streets of LA with people doing demonstrations in his favor. Because López Obrador administration is all about himself.